To your point, the Visas, the MasterCards, they have so much power, so much anointing power, so much gateway power, but all they can do is slow it down. The cat's out of the bag.
You got your perspective. I just want to be happy. Don't you want to be happy?
Let's start with NFTs, those non-fungible tokens. Our audience, our readers and listeners are so interested in those. You've been very busy creating and issuing your own NFTs and selling them. Most recently, you sold your collection of doodles and sketches for over $1 million at auction at Christie's. You started an NFT platform with Julian Schnabel called Art Official. What is it, Gary, about NFTs that has you so enthusiastic? What are they telling us about the future, about collectibles, about authenticity?
I think people are underestimating what digital ownership means. No different than I think people underestimated what having a social media account meant. I don't think, and you know this, we're both of the age where a human having a social media account was foreign. That was not something people did. And today, most people do, even if they have it anonymously to keep tabs on people or use Twitter to keep up with the news or occasionally check Facebook for, birthdays. A shocking amount of society is active on social and even bigger percentages consuming it. And I don't, as somebody who was there in 2005, 6, 7, people didn't see it that way. They saw it as for kids. They saw it as who cares if you're having a piece of pizza or walking the dog. And I think the exact same thing is happening right now in NFT land. I think people are misunderstanding why everyone's going to want to own something digitally. You have all these cool things behind you as we're filming this. There's a reason you want those things. Expressing yourself, decorating your home, a memory to something. There's a million different investment scenarios. And I think that people don't understand that NFTs represent many things. But from an investment standpoint, people want to have digital assets and they're going to trade those digital assets. I also think it goes beyond that. I think the reason somebody owns a Rolex versus a regular watch, a pair of Nikes besides a regular joggers, a Mercedes-Benz instead of a Ford is because of status and expressionism. And then there's the overarching aspect that it is a public, transparent ledger confirmed with no cost association in comparison to leases and mortgages and all the other things. And so to me, this is a foregone conclusion. To me, it's similar to 95 internet life though. I think much like we saw on the internet, there was a lot of public stocks that made no sense, that were worth a lot of money. Pets.com becoming the poster child. And I think the same thing's happening in NFT project land. I think the NFT thing is going to happen. And I want VeeFriends to be Amazon or at least eBay, right? And they were there as dollar stocks back when everything crashed. And I think the same thing's happening in NFT land. The macro concept is here in perpetuity. On the micro, I do believe we're in a gold rush moment right now. And there are a lot of people buying NFTs that will not be as valuable as they pay for them. And that's a treacherous thing to navigate through. The macro's right, and there's an Amazon and eBay out there. Oh, by the way, 8 out of 10 of them are pets.com. How are you going to figure that out? There's a lot of ways to play it. If you're high risk, high reward, you're buying the individual stuff. If you're a little bit different, you're looking at the whole landscape and deciding where you want to be a participant, selling the shovels and the picks, buying individual projects. For example, I've spent a lot of money on CryptoPunks, and I feel like it's my most safe investment I own. Really, genuinely. I'm that convinced that that project, the OG project, the one that kind of established the 10,000 images framework, the one that is owned by many important people and collectors, is incredibly sound. And I think the bottom floor of that is $400,000 a piece right now. And so, this is how I think about things.
What does it conceptually mean, metaphysically mean, in a world where everything's digital, things can be faked? How important is the authenticity, that signature? This is a Garyvee original to the value of things looking forward out a decade or so.
I mean, it's everything, right? I mean, that was the vulnerability of the world we live in today. There was fakes. There's no fakes in NFT land. It's incredibly powerful, and provenance is understood, and who owned it, and the transparency matters. You know, Christie's and Sotheby's are respected and accepted, but it's human based. They can only be so right. It's inconceivable to me that there haven't been fake things sold through the greatest auction houses in the world.
With what you're doing with NFTs, each one of these tokens you recently sold with the VeeFriends collection includes a smart contract with the metadata that you can interact with the buyer with, right? They can get exclusive access. I'm reading to an annual business event called VCon for 3 years. This is more than just buy something that I created because I'm Garyvee. Here's my digital signature. It's a one of one. You're creating community with them. Is that where this is headed to?
Reality is that I feel this is more Walt Disney than it is Andy Warhol. I'm trying to build an intellectual property, TV, film, action figures, this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, these tokens are the original cells, right? And I can create value creation as I keep adding value to the ticket holders, the token holders, the NFT holders. So it's an economy that you're building as a creator of an NFT project. I think we can all agree that Bitcoin is probably dramatically more far along than what many would have predicted it to be 8-9 years ago. And that in itself has to, right?
When you have Visa, MasterCard allowing you to transact, when you have the biggest money managers allowing you to invest in crypto or pathways to that, we're here, right?
I believe so. And I believe we're here on the consumer lens. You know, to your point, the Visas, the MasterCards, the biggest trading firms, they have so much power, so much anointing power, so much gateway power, but all they can do is slow it down.
Right. People want it.
The cat's out of the bag.
What's the natural extension of influence marketing as you see it?
Well, I think what a lot of influencers are going to do now is, and we've seen this progression, it went from, you know, just building up a following and monetizing offline, a book deal, speaking. I lived that back to my original influencer world. Then you started getting into the monetization of the ads, right? The YouTube ad revenue started becoming quite meaningful. Then you started getting into brand deals. Brands started to compensate influencers, and there are plenty of people who make 7 figures a year being a human being on social and having brands pay them money to endorse them, no different than Mickey Mantle or John Wayne, just an influencer flow. Then you started seeing, you know, them influencers starting to build businesses like I did with Empathy Wines, you know, 8-9 figure exits for influencers who built a company on the back of their audience. And now I think you'll see in NFT land, people build, you know, ecosystems, you know, financial vehicles, economies around them. And I think that's where we're going.
Let's talk about investing, which is our domain. You've been a pretty savvy investor, and you've been an early investor in some very successful public companies. Given what we've seen, Gary, in the past 18 months, millions of new traders and investors joining the market through the Robinhoods, the eToros, the Webull, or even a classic online broker. How is that game changing now that we have this very engaged retail base?
It changes a lot. You know, you've got a lot more casual investors, many of whom view it as a vehicle for community, many of them who view it as social gaming is what I would use. You know, like people are buying to game the dynamics. We're seeing investing as an identity. We've seen that with entrepreneurship as a decade. Now you have
Roaring
this.
Kitty is somebody we all know.
That's right. So I think that a couple things on that. One, there's also a lot of naivete and ideology and lack of education, which can lead to huge vulnerability. So, you know, a lot of the quote unquote kids, they like me and I keep pushing them, like, be thoughtful, you know, like get educated. But I think, you know, it speaks well. I actually think it's probably one of the biggest reasons I'm bullish on NFTs. I still believe that the way NFTs are going to play out is somebody's going to be more excited to show you they're holding an X copy or a CryptoPunk than holding 17 shares of Tesla.
Let's talk about how you identify investments that you want to make, public or private, public companies, private companies, businesses you get into. What's your criteria? What are your basics that you put everything through when you look at that prism?
Do I believe in the hypothesis that consumers will like this? And do I believe the human being that's driving it is capable of driving it or adjusting to reality? It's as simple as it gets. And I have a knack for understanding consumers, which already puts me in a very good spot on hypothesis. I also have a very strong understanding of timing. One thing that I've understood now in hindsight, when I look at my success is, oh, I'm good at timing. Like when all my friends are like investing in VR, I understand that VR is going to happen, but I was stronger than them 4 years ago saying VR is further away than you think.
Let's talk about the last year and a half. What influenced you the most in the past year? What did you change about the way you operate as an executive or as a father, as a person, given the last year that we've been through or so?
Before COVID, I started being self-aware that lack of candor as an executive and a leader. Garyvee, the person everybody knows on the other side, strength was candor. People loved that I quote unquote shot it straight on stage, in meetings. But me on one-on-one, in every relationship, on and off the field of business, I struggled with deploying critical feedback or negative feedback. I tried to get around it with optimism, oftentimes met with delusion. And over the last 3 years, I've really chipped away at it. And in my new book that's coming out in November, I called it 12 and a half. It was about these 13 emotional ingredients that I think are essential for business success as a leader or as an employee. And I called it 12 and a half because kind candor is one of them, but I go very vulnerable and say, I'm only at a half on this one. And that's the biggest thing I've changed. I think I'm going through a positive journey around candor.
Well, you not only preach empathy in your business and you have the wine, but I know for a fact that you practice it as a leader, as a father, and as a friend. When did you come to that realization, and how has it made you better?
Early. I knew as a child that I was nicer than most people, that I was more compassionate. I didn't have the words of empathy. I knew I was more sensitive. I legitimately recall crying or being on the verge of tears when kids would pick on kids who had disabilities or were poor. You know, I grew up in my first several years of America, I grew up in lower middle class environments. You know, you find yourself in those environments, there's some kids that are even less fortunate than you, wearing the same clothes to school. I was always very sensitive. I cried a lot. I had a lot of emotions and feelings, but they were my superpower. And I knew as I got older and older and older, it became very clear to me how to harness it. And I'm so proud of my compassion and empathy and sympathy and feelings towards others. I love that I get such a sense of happiness by delivering for others. It's a beautiful, lucky, I want to use that word. It is my DNA. It is a beautiful, but it was, and then even my mother who accentuated it, there's luck in having that mother, right? Like I'm incredibly grateful for the circumstances that led me to be very passionate about other people's feelings.
Seeing the arbitrage and seeing around corners, something you have done ever since I met you years and years ago. And it's been a real pleasure to know you and watch what you've been able to build, but also the person that you've become. Gary Vaynerchuk, thanks so much for joining the Express. So good to have you here.
Thanks, Caleb.